You could be a fantastic advisor, but there's no reason to believe that 20 years of working with clients, all the expertise you've built out, that doesn't default to making you an expert on how some other affiliation option works.
Welcome, Model FAs. I am very excited for our guest today, Brad Wales. Before I introduce Brad, the folks who are probably going to get the most out of this episode are advisors who either recently joined or started their own RIA or are considering moving over to the RIA channel and experiencing true independence wherever your setup is currently. And Brad is an expert in helping folks like you go through that transition, answer some of the questions that you may have. And what I really like about Brad from my experience in knowing him so far is he provides a lot of value and a lot of content for advisors to explore. So we're going to try and compile some of that content today, but make sure to go and check out his website, which will highlight that towards the end of the show. It'll be in the show notes as well. There's a lot of content on there. Connect with him on social. But to introduce Brad properly, Brad Wales is the founder of Transition to RIA, which is a consulting firm uniquely focused on helping established financial advisors understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition their practice to the RIA model. And what I'll say, having been an advisor at Northwestern myself for 7 years and starting to consult for the industry and exploring the RIA model, there's a lot of differences and a lot of different things that I just wasn't aware of. So the content that Brad provides is awesome. Brad utilizes his nearly 20 years of industry experience, including direct RIA-related roles in compliance, finance, and business development to provide independent advice regarding how advisors can benefit from the advantages of the RIA model. And Brad, you're a super cool dude. From our intro call, watched a bunch of your videos, getting a sense of your personality. Love what you're doing. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, David. Appreciate it. Look forward to the conversation. I think we'll have some fun here going over a lot of good content.
Awesome. And for those of you who are listening, there's a saying that I try my best to abide by, which is you have not because you ask not. And I find that a lot of people may be in certain positions and feeling stuck or, not getting referrals. And you ask them, well, have you asked for help or have you asked for referrals? And a lot of times the answer is no. And what I will say is we've done a lot of outreach for this podcast, getting some great guests on here. But Brad actually reached out to us to be a potential guest, and here we are. So if you don't have what you're looking for, ask yourself, are you looking for help? Are you asking for help? Are you surrounding yourselves with the right people? So Brad, good work on being proactive on your end.
Sure. No, I think that you drive the message home. If you don't ask, you don't know where it might lead to. And I think it's a great fit. I'm sure we'll get into it, but just a lot of what you help advisors with, the reality is being able to do a lot of those things. A lot of folks either can't or it's just prohibitive where they're currently at. And so it is just kind of a good mix for folks that say, hey, maybe I'd be better off under the RA model, and talking to someone like me to help them with that. So I think a lot of synergies here.
Love it. So as your bio had alluded to, you've been in the industry for about 20 years in various roles. What was the point in time and what was the reason why you transitioned from those specific roles over to your consulting business now? What had triggered that?
So yeah, almost 20 years in the industry. And I'll tell you, I've had the entrepreneurial itch most of my adult life. You can ask my wife, all the entire time she's known me, I was always, hey, this would be a great idea. This would be a great idea. And so I've always wanted to do my own thing. But a couple main things that eventually, drove me to go start my own firm is the most recent role I was in was with a custodian, as they call them, business development officers. And so I was out there explaining a lot of the same stuff. How do you transition to that RIA model? How does it work? The logistics, the economics, the flexibility, all this. But the challenge was at the end of the day, by nature of my job, I had an employer that my job was to sell a particular solution that custodians offered. And while it's a great solution for some advisors, just naturally, you can't be everything to everyone. And so there's a big chunk of advisors that it wasn't a good fit for. And I struggled with that. It's the proverbial round peg, square hole. And I wanted to be able to help advisors down whatever path was best for them. them, not just the solution that I was tasked with selling. And so that's how I envision what I'm doing now, is just to be completely agnostic of any one solution, don't represent one path, and can just independently help advisors down that road. And then the other thing was some hypocrisy on my part, to be honest. So there I was working in a corporate environment as a W-2 employee, and I had my health benefits provided for me, and I got paid every 2 weeks and those sorts of things. And there I was talking to advisors that are often in that same kind of capacity, at least to the W-2 degree, and they have health insurance and things. And there I was telling them, hey, yeah, you should go off and be independent, and it's way better, and you can figure all that stuff out. And there I was, not even willing to, and obviously in a different capacity, but not even willing to make that jump myself. So it was, to be honest, quite hypocritical of me in that situation to be preaching that. And so I'm happy to say I practice what I preach now, and I've been through those challenges of figuring all that stuff out.
Love it. So if I'm an advisor listening right now and I'm at a broker dealer, I'm at a captive company, I'm at a wirehouse, or maybe I'm working for another advisor who could be in the independent space already, right? And I'm progressing through my career, I'm trying to figure out what's going to be my forever home. Is it going to be at this larger institution? Is it going to be more entrepreneurial on my own? When people come to you and when people start thinking through what does the RIA channel look like and what does going out on my own look like, what causes those thoughts? I guess what pain points am I experiencing at that stage in my career that gets me to look behind the curtain and see what else is out there?
Yeah, and the two main ones, one more of a pull and one more of a push, the latter being the pain points. The two big reasons folks generally start looking at the RIA model is the economics of it and the flexibility of it. And so the economics, and we might dive into some of that, it is what it is. It's generally always better under that RIA model. I mean, every situation is unique, but it's a lot of advantages there. But from a pain point, you increasingly see, and so not that anyone's not excited about the opportunity to generate more compensation every year and have a higher enterprise value on their firm, but it's really the flexibility piece that all too often comes up in the conversations I'm having with advisors. And, it's tough to the degree you're in a more captive firm and you're either outright, again, not allowed to do things or harder to do them, or there's just so many hurdles. The reality is you're out competing against advisors in the marketplace that don't have those hurdles and don't have those handcuffs. And it's hard enough to just compete in general, let alone, to essentially trying to play basketball with one hand tied behind your back. That's hard to compete against. So that's primarily from a pain point, just the flexibility of not being able to do things that oftentimes they believe. And that's part of what the discovery process is with me. They believe they can do on the RIA model, and they're looking to kind of learn more about that.
I certainly agree and experienced myself when I was an advisor, the restrictions around things like, marketing and testimonials, which the testimonial rule actually has just recently changed. And we have an expert coming in to a future episode to talk all about that. So stay tuned for that episode. And so I certainly agree with you there. In terms of the economics of it, I can certainly see how the economics are better. I guess where I would play devil's advocate. So coming from Northwestern, there were things that they did that were awesome, and there were things that they did, which maybe weren't so awesome, right? And the things that they did that were awesome was their structure around their training and development program, the fact that you didn't have to figure out any of the technology stuff, right? They already had all that stuff. So when you're leaving that sort of environment and then you're going out on your own and you have this open architecture, you have no accountability, right? Except for the people that want you to pay, the bills and whatnot. So you have no accountability and you don't know where to go from a technology standpoint. There's, 7 different CRMs or however many there are. So the economics may be better, but at the same time, the headaches may be more frequent, so to speak. So I guess how are you or your company, or what resources do you provide to help the advisors who are looking to make that transition do so smoothly?
And it is a daunting process until you get into it. And I think that's very fair. I would tell you the model's not for everyone. I'll give you a quick example that I do see from time to time. And I think there'll always be an employee channel out there that will forever exist for this reason that, I can talk to, and I've talked to plenty of advisors that, tell me, hey, Brad, at the end of the day, yeah, there's all this crazy comp plan that's always changing around and whatever, but I net about $500,000 a year. I come in at 9 a.m., I leave at 4 p.m., and I coach my kids' basketball game, and I can come and go as I please. And yeah, Brad, you could show me how to make maybe 700,000 and I'd have more flexibility, but I live a great life and I'm comfortable with that. And I totally respect that. There'll always be the advisors that just, they're willing to kind of have some more constraints, maybe not make as much money, but it's a lifestyle that's a great fit for them. So I certainly never suggest that everyone is, meant to go down the RA. But for the ones that do, and you're correct, it's a two-edged sword. You absolutely gain the benefits of the flexibility where now you get to decide all the various vendors you work with. And I remind people all the time, a custodian is simply a vendor of yours. So while a lot of advisors have always thought, okay, I'm affiliated, that would be the correct terminology with a Morgan Stanley or Northwestern Mutual, whatnot. When you end up working as an example custodian, you're not affiliated with them at all. They are just solely one of your vendors, just like you put together a vendor to help you with marketing and a vendor to help you with technology and things like that. So that's the beauty of it, is you have that flexibility to choose on your own who you want to work with. The other side of the sword, though, right, is the complexity of how do I figure all that out? And quite frankly, that's in part why I developed my own firm, not to give a plug for myself, is to help folks navigate all of that and who are the vendors out there and why you might choose one over the other, and to piece that together and to make it not an overwhelming process, but it is a process nonetheless to work through it.
So when you work with advisors, you're helping them from, forming their firm all the way through the tech stack that they should use, through like kind of soup to nuts. Am I understanding that correctly?
So there's three main paths I'll give you real quick of how folks end up transitioning into the RIA model. And so if you look at my website, is not called Start an RIA, it's Transition to RIA. And the reason I say this, for some advisors, that is starting up their own RIA. For others, it might be something a little different. So quickly, and then you'll understand to your question there, the three main ways advisors go into the RIA model is, okay, you start your own RIA, you piece together all the vendors to support you as need be, like I was just describing. The second path is you start your own RIA, but you look to outsource a lot of that, as they say, middle back office functionality to someone else that will help you kind of package it all together and kind of handle it all for you. And then the third is to join an existing RIA platform that essentially does that second option, but then even takes also the responsibility for the RIA itself under their wings. And so it's not your responsibility, yet you can still go out and brand yourself however you want as a DBA name and those sorts of things. And so it really depends which of those three paths you end up going down to determine how much you then need to figure out, hey, should I build out my own tech stack? So obviously, if you're down that first path, solely RIA, you want to do it all yourself, piece it together. A lot more steps than that third path where they've already put that tech stack together. They've gone out what they feel is best of breed, and you get the chance to kind of plug and play, for lack of a better term.
And I would assume that it comes down to, of course, the advisor's vision, but I also find that there's advisors who are great salespeople and great advisors, and then there's advisors who are extremely entrepreneurial and can run a business. So I find that a lot of times there may be advisors who are great salespeople and great at relationship building and great at being an advisor. However, when it comes to running a business, they're not as good as maybe they think they are. And what they'll find is they continue to get in their own way and it's tough to scale. Whereas if they plugged into a platform to basically leverage all the noise off of their plate, they would be able to run that much faster. So for everyone listening, I don't know if you've taken, personal assessment tests like Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinder or things like that, but as you're going through that, I'd certainly make sure to do so. And maybe that's something that, you help with as well, Brad, which is just understanding how they're wired to then determine which path to ultimately go down, because the more you can be in your zone of genius as opposed to your zone of incompetence. So if you ask me, hey, David, do you want to start your own firm and, deal with compliance? I'm like, hell no, I don't want to deal with compliance. Like, if I deal with compliance, I'm totally going to get in trouble because all the stuff I want to do isn't compliant, right? So I think it's a matter of like leaning into your strengths. One thing, Brad, that I wasn't aware of when I was at Northwestern, because Northwestern's kind of like your own little bubble, right? And they do a good job of like insulating you and buying into the culture and things like that. I had no idea what fee only and fee-based was until I started consulting and learning more about the industry. So I guess my question would be, how do you talk to advisors about which model is more appropriate for them if they ultimately do go down the path of starting their own RIA, because they have both options?
as far as being 100% fees or maybe some primary fees and primary commissions? Is that what you're asking?
Exactly. So like, for example, there's some advisors out there in the fee only space where when they implement an insurance product, they don't get paid on that, right? So like, I think about my time at Northwestern, a lot of my income was from insurance. And then if I go into the fee only space, it's like, okay, you're telling me that I'm not going to get those commissions anymore. And then when I was at Northwestern, I had to sell a certain amount of insurance to be able to ultimately charge a fee for a financial plan. So then I go over to the fee only place and it's like, oh, wait, you're telling me that I can like charge someone to just put together the plan that I was doing for free before? So there's those like kind of back and forth moments. So as you're speaking with advisors, how do you determine which path is most appropriate for them?
Yeah, and that is a hotly debated topic. I would tell you there's very strong opinions on that out there. Some people believe to be an RIA, you should be truly fee only, as in that it is purest form as it is. You shouldn't do any commission business on the side. You shouldn't do anything for commissions on the side. And I totally respect that. For folks that want that to be how they structure it, they absolutely can. That is a powerful message to be telling to clients and prospective clients. And then the other school of thought is, and take the insurance example is, hey, yes, I want an RIA. Yes, I want everything I can do with that and help my clients. But part of helping my clients is perhaps certain insurance solutions or in some capacities, certain things that would generate a commission. And so a lot of people don't realize, and that's kind of more your fee based where you're primarily fee driven, but there could be some auxiliary things outside of that. And there are solutions for that. That is a big misconception about the RA model, is that the only option is that 100% pure fee only. And there's absolutely options and even kind of variations of them. So with insurance, you can, as an RA, you can do insurance on the side for traditional insurance commissions, or now there's folks that will work with you to put them in more of a fee-based product. And so it aligns with your kind of fee-only approach to it. So it, like I said, strong opinions on either side. Part of what I help is folks realizing what those options are, and then sometimes talking people out of it. As an example, if someone's not doing a meaningful enough amount of, for example, insurance, then perhaps they are just better off not making that part of their offer, and they do kind of outsource that to, a center of influence they have or things like that. So it's really thinking through each situation.
Cool. So if I'm an advisor, right, and I've made my decision, you know what, I want to break away from where I'm at right now. I want to start my own thing. What's step one?
Step one is understanding it. I talk to advisors, of course, all day long. And I would tell you, I talk to some and they're clearly on a scale 1 to 10. They're already at an 8 or 9 of understanding how the model works. And then on the other end, there's folks that admittedly, and I would verify, are 1 or 2, and that's perfectly fine. And the reason you generally see that need in that education front first is, if you've been at a firm, particularly just one firm, say for 20 years, and that's all you've ever known, or one affiliation model, maybe you've changed firms, so it's one affiliation model, and you could be a fantastic advisor, but there's no reason to believe that 20 years of working with clients and everything, all the expertise you've built out, that doesn't default to making you an expert on how some other affiliation option works. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of it is that education and discovery. And so generally, those first couple conversations someone has with me is just starting from the beginning. What it look like? How do those economics work? How does the flexibility work? Here's how my practice is. Is that compatible with the RA model? So it's a lot of education. And that's the first couple, if you want to use a baseball analogy, the first couple innings of the game is simply education at that point.
So we're past that point, right? We're making the move. If I'm an advisor, one of the things that I'm thinking about is, are my clients going to follow me, right? I guess my first question would be, what do you see in the folks that you're working with? What do you see? And I don't know if you track the exact percentages or if you have just a gut feeling in general, but what percentage of clients tend to make the move with that advisor when they make?
It's a great question. And I'll rant about a pet peeve I have. I actually made a whole video on this.
Where can that video be found? Is it on your website?
Yeah, on my transition.ra.com. And okay. It drives me crazy when you see, and you'll see them if you pay attention, whether advertisements, print ads, or online ads, or whatever, and it's perhaps from a custodian or something, and they're highlighting an advisor that made a successful move, and the advisor, or the quote at least, is, I moved at 100% of my business And that's not going to happen. You're not going to move 100%. And I'll give you a couple examples. One, there might be some clients you just don't want to move, don't want to bring with you. There could be some esoteric account types that for whatever reason just logistically can't move. And so even if you have wonderful relationships with your clients, to think that it's going to be 100%. Now, it might be 100% of the clients you wanted to bring and the clients you're able to bring. And I will back that interpretation up. But I just think it's disingenuous to be tossing this, 100% as if that's just a sure, easy thing. Typically, you usually see, more in the 80 to 90% range, kind of in that first year point. So make no illusions to get back to, say, that 100% of whatever you were at. It generally does take more than just the first 12 months of moving the accounts, because again, you might lose some relationships by design perhaps, but also keep in mind, it's just math. If your current, just simple numbers here and very simplistic, if your current payout is say 40% and under your own RIA, after all your expenses and everything, you're going to net 60%, just super, super easy numbers. You can just run that math. You don't have to even get 100% of your clients ever to come over and still be better off.
Yeah.
That you can run the math on what that break even point is. Not that you're looking to only break even, but there is that buffer just because of that additional compensation you'll make.
So I know that there's firms out there, including, the one that I was at, where I didn't realize as I was, a 20-year-old kid at the time when I started, as I'm signing all these, legit contracts and whatnot, that none of those clients were actually my clients. They were the firm's clients. So for someone who's in a similar setup, what have you seen in terms of the potential legal challenges that come into play when they try and transition folks? Like, are those contracts like legit enough to where you just cannot take your clients at all? Or are there ways in which they can work around those contracts? And obviously all the contracts are different, so we can be more general here, but what do you find are some of the legal challenges and how do we overcome that?
That's another thing I walk advisors through and it's a fantastic question. It's a very relevant question. It is all along the spectrum, as you can imagine. So the easy part of it is if you're already with an independent broker dealer who rightly recognizes that you own your quote unquote book, you have little to no issues at all about making that move. To your point though, there are, the traditional captive firms, whether wirehouse or even some regional firms, that very much believe you, advisor, do not own these book of clients, these relationships. I don't care if you've been working with them for 20 years and have been to their kids' high school graduation. They are not yours. They are the firm's. And they kind of hold that line. And then there's worries about, okay, did you sign something that was a non-solicit or anything like that? So absolutely, that's part of the conversation. Now, I would tell you, there is a process for working through most of those. I'll give you an example of one that is fairly prohibitive, but it is a process of how you can successfully leave. Sometimes firms are protocol or non-protocol, and you got to weigh that into it. For those that aren't aware of that, that's just a mechanism that kind of makes a transition from a legal perspective easier when it's applicable.
What do you mean when you say, some firms have a protocol?
Yeah, so the protocol, for those not familiar, was created, 10 years ago maybe or something. And it was originally made by the traditional wirehouse firms. And the problem was, and you still see this kind of to this day, but back then they joke it's the prisoner exchange. They were taking one advisor from the other firm, and that firm was taking one advisor from their firm. And every time they'd leave, they'd sue each other because of these non-solicits. And it was just this fire exchange. The prisoner exchange. And then they're just, nothing actually is getting done except they're just suing each other, back and forth. And so they got together and made this, what's called a protocol. And basically, if you're a signatory to the protocol, and if both sides, so the firm that the advisor's leaving from and the firm the advisor's going to, are both protocol, it says, okay, we both agree that the departing advisor can take, and it's very limited, but the amount of information about the clients, like their name and things like that, but it's very limited. You can't take account statements or anything like that. And if you follow that quote unquote protocol on how you do it and how you depart, you got to give the departing firm the name of the clients that you've taken this information, that we agree we're not going to sue each other. That expanded over the years into hundreds. It might technically be thousands of firms now in the protocol, because even small RAs can be a signatory to it. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, some firms have dropped out, including some of those original ones. And some of the reasons why some of those original ones dropped out is to the degree they were losing more advisors than they were gaining as a result of the protocol. At some point, it's no longer, in their minds, beneficial for them to be part of it. But
sounds like they need to get better at recruiting and their value proposition, and it wouldn't be that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's the harsh truth, right? That for a couple of the firms that dropped the protocol and they came out with some spin about why that was somehow in the best interest of their advisors, but clearly it was just trying to further tighten the handcuffs. And yeah, you should say, well, shouldn't you just try to keep us advisors at your firm because you provide great service and a great platform, not because you're putting these legal constraints in place? So anyways, back to the original question. If your protocol opportunity, certainly it makes it easier. But if you're non-protocol, and there's some firms that have never been part of protocol that people have left all along, but there absolutely is a very defined process for that, a defined dance. I help people with that. And then ultimately depends on their circumstances. There are specialty attorneys that I bring into the conversation that ultimately advisors want to work through to look at their specific agreement and tell them you can do this, you can't do that. But it's doable, but it is a defined dance, as I say, that you have to follow.
So you're serving as that quarterback where you have all of these resources from technology to compliance to legal, et cetera, that you're bringing to the fold to help get them off on the right foot.
Yeah. So a big part of my value add after you move past that education front, after you decide what path you want to go down, is to the degree you need to work with vendors, which generally you always do. So whether that is these specialty lawyers or compliance folks, there's a whole lot of those folks out there. So who are the players? How are they different? Why might you choose one over the other? What can you generally expect from a cost perspective? And then, by the way, if and when you're ready to make contacts, I can introduce you to these specific people just from my years of networking and whatnot. So you're not just blindly calling someone up to try to start a conversation.
So it seems like this would be a part of the discovery process before someone even makes a decision. Because if you leave and you realize that for one reason or another, you can't take anyone with you, you're like, oh crap, that's not a good thing.
I have some conversations where it just is apparent very early on, and I just try to save them the trouble of explaining, hey, this is just not going to be a situation that's going to work out well for you. That's tough to hear, but sometimes people need to hear the brutal truth. So
cool.
Hey, Model FAs, I know you're enjoying this conversation, but I wanted to take a quick break to talk to you about the Model FA Accelerator. This is a unique collaboration between us and you, where we help you build a financial advising practice that you can be proud of. We focus on the foundational concepts around how to pick a niche or a specialization, how to price your services, how to construct an offer that people are going to buy, and then how to market it and sell it in a way that'll get people to sign on the dotted line and become clients of your firm, all while giving you the information to scale and set up workflows and operational processes that will allow you to reclaim your time and build a practice that doesn't run you. So if you'd like to hear more about that, go to www.modelfa.com/accelerator or www.modelfa.com. Hover over, work with us, and click on Accelerator. Hope to see you in the program.
So we've talked about sort of the beginning stages, right? The before and kind of the process of organizing tech vendors, and you can help with that and whatnot. Share with us a success story, right? Someone who had great success where they were, but they didn't have great happiness where they were, and you had helped them transition to doing their own thing. What's life look like for them now? Imagine you stay in touch with these folks.
Yes, I'll give you a great example. We just happened. Well, I won't generally never try to name firms just to protect the guilty. But I think a great example, and this is back to that flexibility situation, that how I began first talking to the advisors, he wanted to do, which I'm a fan of because I do a lot of myself, videos, instructional videos or whatnot, put them on YouTube, put them on his website to both demonstrate his expertise, to get his name out there, to build credibility, all the reasons people do videos, podcasts, everything like that. So he went to his firm. It was a very large firm. And this advisor's very experienced, very competent. It's clearly the kind of guy that's not going to say something stupid. He's not going to, you guaranteed income off of, whatever. Mm-hmm. There would be no issues with this kind of person doing these videos and putting them out there. And he went to his firm to say, okay, I'd like to do this. And their response back was no. And the reason was no. And they essentially even admitted to him that, hey, we don't have worries about you doing this, but we don't have the mechanism.
One of my biggest pet peeves, Brad. It's like, figure it out because you're missing the boat. So sorry, but that brought up some past experiences.
Yeah, I think most advisors can relate to that. Right? They say it's the lowest common denominator approach to compliance, that you got to worry about the one bad apple can bring down the whole ship of flexibility. And this was just something, look, in today's day and age, videos, this was not, trying to get on the latest app that all the kids are using. And he's the first guy to ever ask about it. I mean, this is pretty mainstream stuff at this point. And so, that was a driving factor. He liked other things about the RA model as well. But ultimately did transition to that model and is now able to do that. And he doesn't have to get anyone's permission to make videos. And he is able to use that as, among other things, a business development mechanism. And it's just sad that that's maybe what ultimately forces people to make a change, something as simple as that. But, I think most firms out there are run by well-intended people that are good people, and they are trying their best to make it as an accommodative platform as possible. I don't think there's, the evil overlords up in the ivory tower that are just trying to make things miserable for advisors. I'm certain that's not the case. I say it's not a firm problem, it's a structural problem. As long as you're at a firm with thousands of advisors, you start falling in some of these traps of where you get lumped in, and it is going to confine you. So as a success story, that's just an easy example of someone wanting that flexibility and made the move as a result of it.
Well, and they can actually be, because in today's day and age, whatever it is that this is my belief anyways, whatever it is that you're providing for a service or selling as a product, like you're not a financial advisor anymore. You're a media company that adds value at scale who happens to provide financial advice. And if you're not positioned like that currently, I think you'll get phased out sooner rather than later and just slowly and surely, you'll become more and more irrelevant. So for those of you who haven't adopted that mindset, I would certainly consider checking out Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Crushing It. It's a phenomenal book. It goes through all the platforms. It goes through the whys and the hows and, the whats for all that stuff. So definitely check that out. And speaking of books, so as I mentioned in the prior episodes, one thing that I'm doing with all these guests is I am asking them what their favorite book is, right? And why that had an impact on them. So Brad, you had submitted 2, one of which I've read, the other one I haven't. And you mentioned that with Trump's The Art of the Deal, which I love that book, you said it had an impact on your life. What was that impact that it had on your life? And when was this? When did you read it?
So it's a slippery slope nowadays in the world we live in to say, one of my favorite books of all time was The Art of the Deal. But the true story, I actually went a little peculiar part of my background. I lived in Alaska for high school and then went to my first year of college up there, University of Alaska Fairbanks. And
where are you living now?
I'm in St. Pete, Florida. So Tampa Bay.
Oh, yeah. I can probably wave to you from this window.
Yeah. We are enjoying our
Well, that's what threw me off because we talked about that before. And then you said Alaska and I was like, wait a second. Sorry, keep going. So
there's a reason I live in St. Pete, Florida now and not.
You're finally thawed out.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of thawing out, how I came across that book was that freshman year. I remember I was, wandering around campus one day between classes or something, and it's, crazy cold during the wintertime and went into the campus bookstore and was just, wandering around. And at that point, I didn't really know what path I wanted to pursue from a degree wise. And on the used, there was like a little cart of used books or whatever. Somehow I started looking at it and there was Trump's paperback, The Art of the Deal. And I ended up buying it for, $4 or something like that. And just read it and was just fascinated by it. I mean, no matter what you think of Trump, I think it's a fantastic book as far as exciting folks about, wow, this all the things you can do from a business front and just being persistent and trying to make stuff happen. And literally that book got me intrigued with the business world and ended up having me go down that path with my education and then into the industry I went. So again, it's a little different story to tell nowadays than it was perhaps 10 years ago, but it has a place in my heart for me.
I will say, and we won't go too far down this path, but regardless of it, whether it's, political folks, religious folks, polarizing folks in general, I think if someone's going to allow their ego to get in the way of getting a nugget from someone, that's an issue in and of itself. And there's a great book called The Ego is the Enemy that you should check out, where it helps to suppress your ego, because I know for me anyways, I try and read a bunch of different perspectives from a bunch of different walks of life so that I'm more well-rounded in my thinking and can have that free thinking mindset as opposed to only getting something from one source and having that be the way. So as you're consuming content, I would encourage you to have an open mind in doing so, regardless of who actually, wrote that book. The other one that you mentioned, which I have not had a chance to read, but it is on my wish list, is The Man Who Solved the Market. So it's tough for me to ask some specific questions about it outside of why is that on your list, but I'll be sure to follow up once I do finish that. So why was that on your list and what's the impact that it had on you?
I think it's just a fascinating read. So for those that aren't familiar, it's about Jim Simons of the hedge fund Renaissance Technologies, who was the original, or he's kind of given the crown as being the original quantitative hedge fund that, as opposed opposed to hiring, MBAs, hired PhDs in physics and all these different fields of study, and went on, and this has started decades ago, and went to try to, would there be a way with enough data to get an edge on the market? And he is attributed, oftentimes even more so than Warren Buffett, as the greatest trader of all time, because his firm has just absolutely printed money in an insane fashion. To give you an example, in his main hedge fund, which is the main one that generates the returns he's known for, it's very secretive. It's now at the point where only him and some select employees of the firm are even investors in it. But most hedge funds, as an example, charge the proverbial 2 and 20 of fees. Mm-hmm. This particular fund, the Medallion Fund's like 4 and 44, some absurd thing. And the reality is, because it creates such absurd returns that they can take these enormous fees out of it and still create these market-beating returns. So anyways, he's just a fascinating guy. A lot of people are enamored by him, but he's highly secretive. I haven't looked at their website recently, but there was not too long ago, the Renaissance Technology website looked like 1985 AOL called and wants their website back. I mean, it was this amateurish looking thing because they purposely don't want anyone to know about them or to be asking questions about them. And the author, Gregory Zuckerman, fantastic author, somehow got a lot of people to talk more so than ever before. And he created this just amazing book and he got Jim Simons himself to talk, which is unique. And so for anyone that's just fascinated by people that have, attempted to quote unquote beat the market, which of course most people try, and long term, That's obviously hard to do. It is a fascinating read, and you got to give it to the guy. The guy's made ridiculous amounts of money. Now he's a huge philanthropist, so it's nice he's giving it back, but great read.
Well, that motivates me to move it up my wish list. So appreciate you sharing the excitement from it. So Brad, before we enter into the after hours section of the podcast, I want to say thank you for being here. I want to say thank you for providing the information and insight. I think thinking back to where I was when I was an advisor, this would have been super helpful for me to just understand at least what the landscape looks like and why people would consider and what the steps are. So I appreciate you doing so. For all of our listeners who may be at that point or soon to be at that point where they're considering a change, where can they find you? What's the best way to contact you? Feel free to give yourself a plug.
Appreciate that. And Will, and before I do, I just want to throw it back at you as well. I think, equally that the content you guys are putting out, if you go back 10 years ago or whatnot, the access to the sort of content that's now out there, whether it's folks like me, it's folks like you on podcast videos, 10 years ago, you were much more walled off if you were an advisor to kind of know really what else was out there and how to learn about it. And now it's just incredible the amount that you can, without having to pick up the phone and talk to anyone, that you can just learn. And so I think it's great, all that you guys are putting in, all your guests, that's invaluable for advisors to learn from. So on behalf of the industry, I appreciate what you're doing as well.
I appreciate that.
So on reaching out to me, I'm a big believer. I need to demonstrate. Hopefully for those listening to this podcast, you found value in the message I've given, but I believe you need to demonstrate your expertise, demonstrate how you can help people before you just expect them to perhaps give you a call. So I won't even give you my email or give you my phone number. I'll just say, hey, if people are interested, go to the website, transition2ria.com. Tons of videos, tons of podcasts I do myself, white papers I've written. And if the message resonates, if you like what you see there, you like what you've heard here, I'd love to connect, and the website makes it easy to do so.
Awesome. I appreciate that. So for everyone listening, what we've been doing is just plugging a little bit of an ask. So if you have found value in today's episode, if you know anyone that's in undesirable setup currently and they've voiced some interest in potentially making a transition, feel free to share this episode with them. If you found value from this episode or prior episodes, one thing that quite frankly would really help us help more people and get more exposure is reviews on iTunes, and continue to move up the ranks with that. So if you would be so kind as to leave a review, we'd really appreciate that. And as a thank you for that, if you take a screenshot of that review and you shoot me a text at 978-228-2338, again, 978-228-2338, 2338. If you shoot me a screenshot with that text, on a monthly basis, we're entering in all the folks who have done so, and we'll do a complimentary coaching session with you and help you out with whatever's on your mind, on your plate, anything that you're struggling with as a challenge or any opportunities that you have in front of you. Happy to spend some time and help you guys out. So appreciate that. Brad, again, thank you for being on the show. And now we'll transition to the after hours portion. In all seriousness, I wish I had access to that information when I was an advisor, because it's just, as I transitioned over to consulting for the industry in general and not just folks at my prior firm, like sometimes I felt silly asking questions like, what's a TAMP, right? And it's like, now we have a TAMP, you know what I mean? So it's little things like that, the various industry acronyms. It was just something that I was never exposed to. So I think that what you're putting out there and the fact that you're providing so much content from an educational standpoint, I think is much needed for a lot of people out there. So I found a lot of value in it.
Thanks, man. I think it's resonated. I'm happy to say it. People do reach out, just like I talked about. Hey, they look at the website, and I think it's just a different world. I mean, I was in a role once where the expectation was the way you connect with folks, the way you try to drum up business is cold call. And that world is gone. People expect you to provide value, provide content before they're going to trust you with their time or energy or anything like that. And so I've gone full bore with it. You guys obviously have as well. I think that's just where the future's going. I think advisors need to be doing the same thing.
For sure. When was the last time that you were flat out rejected from something, and how'd you handle it? Obviously, I'm putting you on the spot here.
I don't know what would be more fun. I've been happily married for many years, so at least no personal
rejections
for a while. My wife did reject me initially at first, so thankfully I was persistent and
there you go.
Came back around on that front. I think there's no doubt in a professional capacity have been rejected, and not so much, thankfully, again, under my new structure, because I designed it that way, where generally the people I end up talking to are the people that want to talk to me, right? That's a crazy business development idea, is to talk to people that want to talk to you. But back when I was kind of tasked with trying to drum up business, whether it's just directly cold calling or before someone even knows who you are, clearly you get rejected by that. And, I guess the more you get rejected, the more it helps you, but that doesn't mean that's how I wanted to do business. There is by the way, on rejection, if that's a topic that you find intriguing, there's a guy, I think he did a TED talk on it that I thought was fascinating. And you might have seen it. If you did, cut me off, you can share the tale as well. But he wanted to overcome, for professional, personal reasons, everything that, right there, no one likes rejection. It's ego, it's embarrassing, whatever the case is. And so he wanted to kind of oversee, hey, could that be overcome? And so he made a challenge to himself that once a day for 100 days, he would do something. I'll give you some of the examples that there's a good likelihood he'd be rejected. And his theory, which ended up bearing out, was that you do that enough, you get to the point, whether it's thick skin or whatever analogy you want to use, that it didn't bother him anymore. And then part of the lesson too is it's surprising, which we talked about at the very beginning of the podcast, of what you can actually achieve if you're willing to ask. And so, he did little stuff at first, whether it's, on a personal front, ask someone for their phone number, right out of the gate, and okay, you're probably gonna get rejected. But it's interesting. He said he had to keep raising the bar, because he's like, it's incredible what, not always, but it's incredible what you can accomplish if you just ask. And it got to the point, I remember one of the examples was he was in some neighborhood and someone's backyard, there was a swing set, and he thought, okay, what happens if I knock on the door and ask them as a full grown man if I can play on their swing set for a little bit? He thought, there's no way in hell they're going to say yes to this. And they said yes. They were so intrigued by this, whatever. And in most instances, people are like, dude, get the hell out of here. But yeah, it just validated his point that, one, again, you could get more than you think if you're willing to ask. And then, man, if you're willing to ask to play on someone's swing set that you don't know, there's not a whole lot in life that you're not willing to ask,
That's so interesting. Well, it goes back to, as you mentioned, what we were talking about before, which is, you have not because you ask not, right? So if you're building your calluses, so to speak. But I also do agree that there's better ways to warm that person up before going in for an ask. So like, you do a really good job at the content production. So basically, if someone reaches out to you, they're probably 80 or 90% certain that they're going to end up working with you because they've already done their due diligence. So I think that if you have patience when you're starting your business and you have either some financial run room or other ways in which you can create income in the meantime, you can go about business development, I think, in the right way and the more comfortable way for all parties. And certainly like cold calling and stuff like that still works. I have a buddy of mine, I'll give him a little shout out here, Tyler DeMoro, and he's just an animal. Like, he just like runs through people's faces, like I'm talking, he'll make, depending on the day and how many meetings he has, he'll do 300 to 500 cold calls a day. But like, he also elevated his business to the point where like this month, he'll do as much business as he did half of last year, right? Because it's finally coming to a head, and he's just cold calling, heavy hitters, people who are making, $1 to $10 million a year. And his mindset is, as soon as they answer the phone and tell me no, we have a relationship now, right? And he can follow up with them. So, there's times where people are like, dude, you've called me literally like 12 times that like I've answered, never mind the times I've ignored you, like I'll take a meeting with you. Like, he just like breaks them down. Me personally, I couldn't do that. That doesn't give me energy. For him, again, he's a psychopath in a good way, and he's just, hammering the phones.
Good for him. I mean, to each their own. And it's a numbers game, right? I mean, the math and theory says it works. It's just, you got to be that, it's got to work for you. It doesn't work for me, but I'm happy for him. It does,
Yeah.
So.
What's the biggest mistake that you've seen an advisor make during their transition? I would assume be against your guidance, right? Because you try and help them with that. But there had to have been something where an advisor tripped up somewhere and someone else can learn from their mistake.
Yeah, I'll give you kind of a general answer and then be careful of type thing, which thankfully the latter one wasn't specific to me, but you see it happen in the industry. So the first one, and this is self-serving for me to say this, but if you're looking at wanting to learn about the RIA model and whatnot, if you reach out, and again, I used to be one of these people, so I'm not knocking it, but if you reach out to a particular solution company like a custodian or existing RIA or whatnot, again, they'll help you, but again, they do have a particular, agenda of where they'd like you to land. And so there is benefit. Again, it's self-serving for me to say that because this is the value I provide, is to work with someone completely independent of that, can walk you through it and make sure you're going down the right path and not perhaps getting too far down a path and not realizing other options exist. So I think if you want to call it a mistake, I think it is important just to really know what all is out there and not get your information solely from one source that perhaps has an agenda to kind of steer you down a path. And then you see this from time to time, and we talked about this earlier in the podcast of, leaving particular firms, and do you have solicitation agreements and things like that? And you will see occasionally the industry press that, some advisor left this firm and now that firm's going after him and they've put a TRO, a temporary restraining order against him. And sometimes that's even successful. And 99% of the time, every time I see that headline, I open it up and I'm like, okay, here we go. Read the article, wait for it. The advisor did something absolutely stupid that they should not have done. Whether that's they went out guns a-blazing, they, were so annoyed with their firm that they go out all poking the bear on the way out, or they specifically do things you shouldn't do. And again, that's where it comes back to. I talk about there's a particular dance you have to play. Don't think you can go outside of that, because there's a reason those kind of parameters have been set of generally how this works. And so from a mistake, that's enormously costly. That could be a career mistake, but almost in every instance, it's something that could have been avoided if they just followed. Well, if they got the guidance to begin with, and then they followed it to go with it.
Yeah, I feel like that happens a lot of times when people can be like headstrong and they're like, screw this, I'm just going to do it my way. And they're like, oh no, these laws and these contracts are real, and they come and bite you in the butt. Last question that I have for you, and I don't care if you bring me all the way back to grade school or if it was yesterday or anywhere in between, but thinking about your whole life, what's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you?
Oh, wow. I like it. Most embarrassing. I don't know if I've had any massive one-off blow-offs. I'll tell you a time that was, I guess, embarrassing but tough to adapt to. Thankfully, it wasn't self-inflicted. Crazy story. This is thankfully a number of years ago, but I had actually a problem with my vocal cord and had to have a bunch of surgeries on it. And now I have a new respect. Sometimes you hear about, singers or bands or whatever that have to take a hiatus from their tour because the lead singer has a vocal cord issue. And I used to think, that's crap. That's just their way to get off the road and they're being lazy. But actually, anyways, I did have a problem and of all these surgeries. And part of it was one of them, I couldn't talk for 10 days after the surgery. And so for someone that their whole life has talked, talked, that awkward challenge, and it's actually a little soul searching, but where it's maybe embarrassing, and I hated this, is just little, and I sympathize because unfortunately there's people in the world that can't ever talk, and little things like someone would open the door for me and I'd walk right on through and then not even be able to tell them thank you or anything like that.
Oh, you're so rude, Brad.
Yeah, it's just a jerk move, and then I couldn't even explain, no, but seriously, I can't talk for 10 days.
You need
whatever.
like a note card or like a recording device that you could just play it for them.
That was embarrassing. And I'd see it happen and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm coming up on the door. Someone looked back, they see me, they're about to open this door. I'm like, oh, so if that's the worst embarrassing thing that I've had in my life, it's certainly not the worst life you could live, but that was a challenging time and made me appreciate. It's interesting. There's a lot of stuff in life you don't appreciate that you've had your whole life until it's taken from you. So there's a little lesson in it too. But
well, that question, I can't ask that and not answer it, myself. Right.
Yeah,
so I've already shared embarrassing stuff on other episodes, so I won't be too repetitive, but this one actually happened the other day. So I've been, working out a lot, and as a result, like my muscles are becoming more like tight and I'm becoming less flexible. So I've been, stretching a lot more. And finally I was like, you know what? I did yoga a few years ago for like 6 to 9 months or something like that. And I really enjoyed it. And for one reason or another, I just kind of got away from it. So I'm going to go check out yoga. So I did this yoga class and it was like a restorative yoga. And it was just basically like sitting in the room with other people and stretching. And I was like, I don't really like this. So then the next day I went to their hot yoga session, and it's this beautiful studio, beautiful women as well. And, yoga is awesome for, that reason as well. It was funny because what ended up happening was during hot yoga, you're drenched in sweat. So, I took my shirt off and just dripping sweat, had a towel, wiping myself off. And there was one pose, I forget what it was, but you got up on your toes and then you sat down on your butt and you rolled back on your back. Well, my mat and my back was so wet that, and mind you, brand new to this studio, second class, don't know anyone. And I rolled back and it sounds like I let out a big fart because the way that my back and the mat hit with the sweat in between, and immediately turned beet red. And so that literally just happened. Today's Friday and that happened on Wednesday. So there's an embarrassing story for you.
Well, so you're saying you've concocted this story and you can now deliver it pretty well to actually cover up the real task at hand that happened.
Well, I guess we'll never know. You'll never know. But it's funny when, COVID first came out, there was something that I thought was funny about it, which was before I used to cough to cover up a fart, and now I fart to cover up a cough.
Yeah, I've not heard that. That's funny. But gosh, if let's hope we're never in that world again where we ever have to use that saying, but that'd be good.
Well, cool, man. I appreciate it. I know we're basically living right down the street. So once we stop recording here, we'll organize a get together and meet in person. But appreciate you joining. Appreciate the time, of course, and grateful to continue to explore, what it could look like to work together beyond just sharing some content back and forth.
Yeah, great time. Thank you for having me on. And it's a good podcast when it runs from talking about securities attorneys to yoga farts. So man,
that's the point, man. Humanize ourselves. So appreciate it. For everyone who stuck around for the after hours portion, appreciate your additional time. Hopefully there was some chuckles along the way, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.